Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, looking for the setting on your drum machine that will make you sound like fine young cannibals or else a scrappy upstart, looking for the setting that will make you sound like MGMT, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the second Friday of May 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Avi who drove a Mazda Protege with a NoFX bumper sticker and who was always trying to sell you crushed up Xanax out of a Skittles bag. And old Avi would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music, and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, every single Sunday night, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. It's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I think that we're building something of a community over there. So, come on over and be a part of it every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, Patreon. You search for my name, or you search for The Working Songwriter, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and you won't miss a couple of bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's done that. If you're not in a position to help out in that way, I totally understand. You could still help out our show for free by doing one of two things. First, you could leave us a review in iTunes, or you could tell a friend about the show. You could just spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. I'll end all the harassment there. Thank you for being here this week, and I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. Our guest this week originally hails from Florida. Amigo the Devil is the artistic moniker of Danny Carranos, a songwriter who has made his bones on the road for the last decade. Until COVID hit in 2020, he kept the midnight oil burning with a frenetic touring schedule across the United States. His brand of country and folk music has a decidedly macabre bent. Is that how you pronounce that word? I think it is. His songs often focus on all manner of dark subjects, serial killers, suicide notes, and generally sympathy for the devil, to the point where his sound has been described as murderfolk. His music has inspired a cult following around the country, including many devotees who choose to memorialize his dark lyrics in tattoos. No Depression has said of him, Amigo the Devil is not only navigating the light and darkness of life, but he's striving to unearth the beautiful freedom that exists in the space between and offer it to those who have ears to hear. American songwriter has said of his work, beneath this veneer of mirth and melodrama, there's an artist who gives full rein to intrigue and intellect in equal measure. And the Austin Chronicle heaped this praise upon him. As much Tom Waits as Roy Orbison, Amigo the Devil expertly navigates the twisted path between a metaphorical heart on a sleeve and a real live beating one bloodying up his flannel. Danny and I caught up on the phone last month, and I got to hear about his journey so far. Danny Carranos, better known as Amigo the Devil, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. Let's start at the beginning here. How did music become a part of your life as a kid, and what did that look like?
I feel like my discovery of music was probably everybody else's annoyance in my life, because I remember being young and absolutely loving how things sounded in general. Like when things were hit or they fell or shuffled around, I used to love hearing how different things sounded. And once I started getting older and realizing that there's a structure to this, and they call it music, I just instantly, it's always been in my life, and definitely blame my parents for most of that, but yeah.
It really is a trip how early on kids are affected by music. It shows what a deep connection it is. But you're saying it wasn't even music necessarily at the start. It was literally like an aural fascination that you had as like a very young toddler.
Absolutely. It was, I remember being able to identify certain things based on the sounds that I was hearing from across the house. And that to me was absolutely mind-blowing. It was just insanity, because you're described music as this thing, sound as this thing that you hear and all that, but it doesn't ever really get described as a description of something.
Mm-hmm.
It's simply an asset of a material object. It sounds like this, but that sound never gets described as a qualifier or as a description of said object. And to me, that was always a really, really fascinating aspect of anything that was material. So
that's funny. This is jumping ahead a little bit here, so we'll jump back later. But the description that you're talking to me about there, that's almost like an audio engineer's ear, the way that they listen for tones and sounds like that. Have you found, as you've gotten older, made this career where you're actually recording music, do you engineer stuff yourself, or do you find yourself interfacing with the audio engineer a lot because of that fascination?
I wish I did. I have such a weak spot for technology in general, and that includes analog gear and all that. So as much as I wish that I could engineer my own things, I just don't. I don't have the brain for it. I'm too dumb for that.
No, you're not too dumb. Just get rid of the analog stuff. All the digital stuff is so easy. It's just a bunch of buttons that make things sound good. So
just touch it and it sounds good.
Yeah.
But I haven't really taken too deep of a dive. I've always just trusted the people that we've worked with, and
sure.
In my opinion, it's worked out so far, to my joy at least.
Sure. But do you find, I mean, obviously you don't have to have your fingers on the dials yourself, but do you find yourself communicating with engineers in that way? Like you were talking about the sounds of music being almost like having qualities that were, I think you used the word assets, like the assets of these qualities of music. Do you find yourself interfacing with engineers and using language like that to get them to make it sound different for you?
I do. And it's usually a very, very fun experience in the studio because it's a group of minds together trying to figure out what I'm actually trying to say, which is not usually what I'm really trying to say. So if I hear a certain sound in my mind, it'll be, okay, I want something that sounds like a knife scraping across a concrete floor as the percussive sweep.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll pull out a knife and we'll scrape it on a concrete floor. And then I have to go, that, but not like that. And so I'll sit there for 20, 30 minutes just scraping the knife across different textures, and I'll finally find it, and then they figure out the best way to capture that sound.
Gotcha. You got to have engineers in your life that are very patient and very creative. Because I've worked with guys before that, I mean, if you even just ask for something really simple, they start acting like the comic book guy in The Simpsons. You know what I mean?
That's a really great analogy. I do agree, and I've been very fortunate to work with some incredibly patient, thoughtful, which is I feel like thoughtful is kind of a rare one across the board for anything related to music nowadays. But we've been very fortunate to work with some incredible engineers that have fun with it as well. It's not just them trying to appease somebody. It's them having a good time.
That's important. So take me back then when you do make the switch from, just this fascination with sound to, the organization of sound, which is music. What do you remember as some of the seminal works that you listened to as a kid or a teenager or a young adult that really got you interested in music for the first time?
So the first cassettes that my mom would play in the car that I remember, I'm sure there were others that grabbed me before, but the first few that I remember capturing me that I was curious about, it was Simon and Garfunkel, Elton John and Billy Joel, and Meatloaf.
That's a holy trinity of kinds there, man. That's great.
Those are the first four that I can remember being in the car for.
And then when did you branch off and start listening to music that wasn't your folks' music, and what did that stuff look like?
I want to blame my cousin, who was a few years older than me. I was around eight-ish, nine-ish, and I would go visit him. And he was a big metalhead at the time. That was his thing, was just, Slayer and Testament and any thrash he could get his hands on. That was his thing. So every time I would go over, I was his fun little project. I was his experiment of how could he corrupt me and ruin my life. And so, and he succeeded. He got me into all the music that led me down the rabbit hole that I've been dealing with. It's he used to play me music all the time, and it was usually very, very, for that age in my mind, very extreme music that I wasn't comfortable with listening to yet because it didn't click. I just didn't get it yet. But that kind of started my path into just turning on the TV and starting to listen to things that were on the TV. And to be honest, at that point, I was still more interested in noises than I was in music itself.
It's funny.
It wasn't until I was...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Oh, no, I was just saying that it wasn't until I was probably 10 or 11 that I really started to go back to the things that my cousin was handing off to me and re-listening and going, oh, I get it now.
Totally. You were kind of half joking about your cousin corrupting you, but what a lot of listeners listening now who are maybe a bit younger don't realize is, 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was kind of a moral panic over metal and any sort of music that was aligned with the quote unquote occult. Don't you remember what a different environment it was even, a dozen, 15 years ago?
Oh, it was so much different, and it was less accessible, and I genuinely feel like there was this atmosphere of almost, it was true rebellion at that point.
Yes.
If you decided at a young age to essentially, even from the parents' perspectives, I remember all my friends' parents being like, "Oh, my child has forsaken me. I'm done. My life is over because my child is embarrassing. He is now in league with Satan, and I'm done."
Right. I mean, it's a serious thing. There would be like national like television news segments on stuff like this, like literally.
Yeah. My first metal experience that I had on my own. So my cousin had played me "Raining Blood," the song "Raining Blood" Slayer, and same thing. I pretended to like it at that age, and he was like, "All right, cool, glad you like it." And then I went home and forgot about it. I would say easily a year or so later, all I could hear in my head was dun, 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 dee, 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 dee. And I was like, "What is that? Where do I remember that from?" And it was months of freaking out. And back then, there was no app to sing a melody into and get the answer right away. So
totally.
I remember singing it to everyone I knew, and everyone was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And I was losing my mind. I was so upset about it. It just consumed me. Finally, I was in a record store, and I remember it was Uncle Sam's in Miami Beach. And "Raining Blood" started playing, and the intro came on, and I just yelled in the middle of the store to my mom. Again, I'm like 10 or 11. I go, "This is a song!" And she had no idea what I was talking about. So I ran to the counter, and I was like, "Who is this?" And he told me, and I went to try to buy the CD, and my mom, who's a very nice Latin lady, said, "Absolutely not." She looked at that CD and said, "Absolutely not."
Looked at that CD with probably the parental advisory sticker. I mean, that was part of that moral panic was the advisory stickers on the cellophane on the front of those records.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What a trip, man. It's different now. Like you said, like it really was a form of rebellion. Now it seems a little bit more difficult to shock people in that vein. Has anything been lost in that it's not as shocking or not as in some ways rebellious as it used to be? Or is it still as rebellious?
I think there are definitely still forms of that rebellion. Maybe they're not similar to what someone else is accustomed to or expecting, but I feel like anything that doesn't align with what the generation or two above is used to and familiar with is going to seem rebellious to some degree. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that the rebellion necessarily doesn't have to pertain to a certain quality or harshness or topic in music. I think it generally can be whatever isn't the thing everyone is used to.
Right.
And right now, the whole shock value aspect. I mean, for me, for example, I definitely grew up around a group of kids and listening to music and watching movies that were very based on shock value. Mm-hmm. And over the years, growing up, I lost the interest in things for just the sake of being shocking. That's kind of okay, we get it, fine. But at the same rate, I realized that there is a lot in that shock value that isn't necessarily positive for the progress of society at all. And it does lead to sort of tricky paths in terms of setting really just brutal precedents for future generations and things like that. And I think people are finally starting to learn the line of, like, there is a line between exploring taboo subjects, talking about, singing about, presenting taboo subjects, and on the other side of that fence is exploiting taboo subjects for shock value's sake itself. And I think people are starting to realize that one of them is not necessary, and you can still get the same emotional value and emotional blunt force and shake, whatever it shakes in your soul from the other side without exploiting those taboo subjects.
And I would imagine also, you mentioned that it wouldn't necessarily be good for the progress of society. I imagine that it would also, in a way, kind of handcuff you creatively and artistically, because, I mean, you were just describing the process of finding a sound, and you know, you start scraping a knife on a concrete floor, then scraping it on other things, and you're kind of chasing an idea that you have in your head and you want it to be true. Well, you're doing that in many different aspects when you're creating something creatively. So I wonder if having to always find something that is of shock value or of taboo, if that would start to lead you away from sometimes where your artistic path was leading, thinking like, well, this led me to a place that's not very shocking. Can I use that now? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I feel like I found myself in that position a couple of times, to be honest, just because, you know, people do know this project for the dark themes and the dark subject matter and whatnot, and sometimes there are songs that I write or that I want to write that have nothing to do with whatever it is people expect me to write about, and I do feel tied to, okay, cool, so I have this idea, how do I make it dark now?
Yeah.
And luckily, I haven't actually followed that mindset. I have just kind of written whatever it is I want to write. Maybe there are some songs that I've set aside for later.
Sure.
But I've never purposefully gone into an idea and tried to twist it to make it fit the catalog. And it's funny because the older I get and the more I learn about songwriting and, to be honest, storytelling itself, I realize that a lot of the most brutal aspects of songs. So, for example, like Guy Clark, Dublin Blues, to me is one of the most brutal songs thematically. It just kills me. It destroys me. And there's nothing crazy about it. Right. You know, there's nothing. All the words are very, very basic words. It's not this poetic song structure. It's very matter of fact. And I started realizing that the absolute most terrifying element that you can sing about is humanity from an honest perspective. Because everyone's listening to music to escape, and everyone's looking at art to escape. But as soon as you bring in the human element from the completely just nude, honest, completely exposed version of itself, people have to face humanity. And that's a terrifying thing.
I couldn't agree more. I just couldn't agree more. And I think it's something that resonates deeply with people, these sort of these stories that are told over and over again in generation and over and over again. And the general theme seems to be, no matter what culture you're in or where you grew up, it seems to be, you know, human beings know how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to treat each other, and yet we fail to do that generation after generation after generation. And it's terrifying and really sad, but also really hopeful, because you feel like, well, we do know how we're supposed to treat each other, so maybe this time it'll be different. It just never fucking is.
It never, ever, ever is. You're right about it. Oh, God.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter, because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. As is so often the case with writers who explore the morbid side of life, I found Danny himself to be laid back, lucid, and with a generally sunny disposition. That's always the way that it works, right? The pop stars with the superficial songs are the ones that turn out to be monsters behind the scenes, and the death metal singers who sing about blood are the ones who would help you change your tire on the side of the road in the middle of a hailstorm. And there's something to that. It's almost like writers who explore the cynical side of human nature find themselves doing so because they expect so much from themselves and from other people. They don't seem to understand why human beings, who have the capacity for incredible virtue, so often act depraved. Religion has a framework to describe that phenomenon, but modernity really doesn't. And so artists, being the intrepid diviners of meaning that they are, go looking for it themselves in their writing process. That's what I hear when I listen to Danny's music. And there's a wonderful piece by the poet Dean Young that also sounds like that to me. It's entitled Crash Test Dummies of an Imperfect God. Because we are so stupid, the prizes in Cracker Jacks are now paper so that they can be swallowed. Ladders spackled with warnings. No getting within 100 feet of Stonehenge because everyone wants to hack off a souvenir. And the way home is clogged to one lane so whoever wants to can stare into a pothole until coming up with a grievance. I'd vote the greatest accomplishment of mankind is the pickle spear. God created paradise to tell us, get out, which is why we probably created God, who doesn't much like being created by ilk like us. No wonder it's pediatrics every morning and toxicology by happy hour. Is it all in the mind, the dirty, dirty mind? Maybe God tried to turn you into a garbage can so you could be lifted by the truck's hydraulic arms and banged empty. Maybe a snow cone so you could be sticky sweet and dropped. Maybe a genital-faced bivalve to be dashed with Tabasco and eaten whole, or to his glory produce a pearl. take me back a little bit. We keep on getting ahead of ourselves here because I keep on getting interested in what you're saying. But
Oh,
take me
sorry.
back then to, you start to be exposed to this music that your cousin's been playing for you. You start to kind of hear what your voice could and what it would be. When do you take the step to start playing music on your own? And then when do you take that step even further to say, hey, maybe this is something that I could do all the time. In fact, maybe I could do it for a living.
I'd say around. So I didn't. For this next part, I definitely will separate myself as a musician now and myself as a musician then,
Sure.
as well as, honestly, not just musician, but person. As a person then, person now. We all grow, but this is also a little more extreme than that, because back then I really did only have the influence of certain aspects. In Miami, I had the metal that my cousin was showing me, the hardcore community in Miami that I was growing up around, and then I had the minimal, I guess, the Simon and Garfunkel, the Billy Joel, Meatloaf, Kenny Rogers. That was the extent of music from the U.S. that was played in my household because my parents are not from here. So everything else was either Greek music from my dad or Latin and traditional Spanish music from my mom. So when I started messing around with music, it wasn't really, I didn't even pick up an instrument. It wasn't that I played an instrument. I met some friends. I was, 13. I'm going to say 13.
Okay.
Met some friends, and they had this band, and they were just doing these little punk covers and stuff like that. It was silly. It was a 13-year-old band. And I remember I decided I want to play music now. So I'm going to be in your band. And they were like, well, what do you play? I was like, guitar. I was lying. I didn't even own a guitar. So they're like, all right, cool. Well, like, just come to practice and we'll all play together and all that. And I was like, well, that was not a lie that worked in my favor.
Right.
So I start panicking, and my cousin gave me the same cousin, gave me his, I want to say it was a Squire. I'm pretty sure it was a Squire. I remember the color.
It was definitely a Squire. Just from your whole story talking right now, I can just guarantee you that it was a Squire guitar.
And so I remember spending that the whole next week I'm just barely sleeping, just learning how to play guitar. And I knew the songs that they played because I'd heard them do their thing. I was hanging out with them. So I remember specifically trying to learn those songs. And I want to say it was really, really, really trying to, I know it was like Millencolin, I think, was one of them. It was things like that, like little pop punky stuff more than anything.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, sorry, rambling. And so I learned them about a week, and I showed up, and I played with them. Played horribly, but I played them. I got through them. And we were all like, whoa, this is so much fun. This is awesome. And after about a month or so, I ended up actually learning how to play. And we started our first band. So that kind of progressed into a few different bands, a few different versions of that project. And from 15 to 17, I was touring with them, with my friends, and we were playing all around the country. It was kind of crazy at a very, very young age. I mean, no one was showing up, but we were playing. Mm-hmm. And this was back before a lot of cool. So we had our MapQuest printouts, and we were all packed into our friend's dad's Suburban that he would let us borrow. It was fun. It was amazing. So, fast forward, I was touring with that. I was also playing in other adjacent, like more metal bands, because that was more of that same vein of pop punky, screamo, post punk, whatever makes you want to call it. Mm-hmm. I was also playing in heavier bands adjacent to it, and then I decided that music is for suckers, and I stopped once that band broke up. I was like, this sucks. This is for idiots.
Why was music for suckers at that time, in your opinion?
I think because it didn't work.
Yeah.
I think I was so bitter that I had genuinely, essentially given up school for it. I thought that was it. That was my life. I was going to play in this band, pipe dream. And when that dissolved, it was just crushing for me because I didn't know what I was going to do. So 17, I ended up moving to LA from Miami. Ended up trying to play in a few bands there. And that's genuinely when I decided, okay, yeah, music's not my thing. I don't want to do it. So I went to school for brewing. I got my degree in fermentation sciences. And I was in the brewing world for a long time. I mean, there were a few years between quitting and brewing, but they don't matter. They were a mess.
I know about yours.
They were.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it wasn't until about 2010 that I really missed playing music. And that's when I started messing with the acoustic and banjo that I had in the house. I didn't really play them. I just started messing around with them. And I started writing a couple of songs, and I really liked it. And so that's how this hobby was born in San Francisco. And I was still brewing. It wasn't until... So one of my friends convinced me to start playing some shows around 2012. And in 2013, I started touring full-time. I'm sorry, full-time's relative.
Yeah.
2013 to 2015, I toured as much as I could, whatever you would consider a tour back then. It was literally showing up places and playing for two people. 2015, I would say, is when things really, really started to pick up on the touring side. And then around 2017, we started doing 300 plus shows a year.
That's crazy, man. What brought you back to music? Was it a need to say something artistically? Was it a missing of the community that forms around music? Like, what made you dive back into that world after you'd gone and, I was assuming at great expense, educated yourself in something totally different, changed your life? What brought you back in?
I think selfishly, on one hand, it was the fact that I realized I could do it alone. I didn't need other people to do it with.
Yep.
So that eliminated half the equation I was sad about. The other part was that it made sense. It was something that just made sense to me. It was exciting to be able to express how I felt inside and just tell these stories, essentially. But at the end of the day, it was the only thing that I knew how to do myself that would get me out of the routine that I had every day. I'm not a very routine-oriented person. So I was struggling in my career.
You're not a routine-oriented person, but then you start playing 300 shows a year, and nothing could be more routine than being on the road playing clubs, dude. It's wake up at the Holiday Inn, drive for 4 hours, sound check. You know what I mean? Like that's very
Let me
routine driven.
let me rephrase that then. I don't like knowing that I'm living a routine.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough.
I like for it to feel like there are small elements that are different.
And there are on a tour. To be fair, to be fair.
Yeah. But I mean, you're right. It is the same schedule. You know, just because it's a different city doesn't really mean much. Same four walls. It's amazing.
As this has blossomed from, I mean, you said yourself when you picked it back up again, you almost looked at it as a hobby. As this blossomed from a hobby into your job and now into something more serious where, you know, you have a fan base of people that are wanting to hear what's going to come next. They have expectations. How has that changed your creative approach from a hobby where you knew no one was really listening now to your job where you know that you do have a listenership that's putting some expectations on you in some way?
I go through bouts where I feel like there are different phases of songwriting, or I mean, well, everyone I would say, but my specific phases are very rooted in segments of fear, right? So I have the honeymoon phase where I have these ideas for songs and I'm super happy with. I'm excited. I'm excited to work on these songs and these stories. And then I go into the phase of just complete panic that these are going to be horrible. Mm-hmm. And I doubt everything. And I start to have my little meltdowns. And that leads me to the next phase. When I'm at that low and I'm hitting the meltdown, I start considering, well, is this even anything that the people who listen to this project want to hear? Mm-hmm. And that is usually the hardest one to get through, because that's when I start writing new songs to pander to the project itself. Mm. And I usually hit a phase where I have, a handful, most of a record of songs that pander to the records I've written before. Mm-hmm. Luckily, I have never gotten stuck in that phase, and I wake up one day and I throw all of those songs into the trash. Mm-hmm. And then the final phase is where I realize you cannot pander. I cannot pander. I can't write based on what I think everyone wants to hear. And so far, everybody's been so incredibly kind about it. And I feel like the listeners and I have both been growing together on this journey, which makes whatever Amigo the Devil is much more exciting for me and hopefully them.
So is that last phase then, is that you returning to the songs that you'd originally written and gotten depressed about, or is that you throwing away those original songs, throwing away the songs that were pandering, and writing a third crop of songs, as it were?
So I'll usually take ideas from the first batch mm-hmm. and kind of rework them to fit the mood at that time, to fit the specific atmosphere of that moment. And then the songs from the second batch that go in the trash, mm-hmm. I have ended up picking out lines from here and there and just kind of, this line works for this sentiment. This phrase works for this song. So it's not a total waste, but it is a process. And that's why I'm a very, very slow songwriter. Like some people are just, they wake up and they're like, here's 10 songs.
Right.
I'm an incredibly slow songwriter. I have to punish myself for months before I can get anything out.
Well, it sounds like a bit of a self-flagellating process there, but it sounds like one that bears fruit, so can't argue with it.
Oof.
How do you deal? You were saying that you are traveling, upwards of obviously pre-COVID, upwards of 300 shows a year. How do you deal with the stress and the kind of mental health challenges of being on the road? What are some of the routines that you have, and what are some of the ways that you try to take care of yourself so that you don't go crazy?
Um, I, mm, I struggle with being home a lot more than I struggle with being on the road.
Really?
Yeah. I genuinely struggle with coming to the same building daily. And that was one of my problems with brewing, with my career, was that it was the same building. So back to that routine thing, yes, there's a routine to touring, but I have a comfort instilled in me. And I mean, granted, it was my mom, for example, the only thing that my mom cared about. She didn't spend money on anything but traveling.
Mm.
Nothing. She didn't care about anything but traveling. So, and anytime there was, some money, she would find a deal and take us, me and my sister. She would take us somewhere. Whether we were driving, whether it was cheap. We got super lucky. My dad is a pilot.
Mm-hmm.
He lives in Greece, but he's a pilot. And growing up, we used to get standby tickets for free from him, from the airline he worked at. So again, it was just the only thing my mom cared about. And I think that always being gone as a kid, and then starting to tour at 15 and being gone then. And then from there up until, 4 or 5 years ago, I was moving twice a year. I could never sit still. So my routine, my comfort is leaving.
Got it.
I still haven't figured out what I'm running away from, but there's got to be something.
Hey man, just keep up the same speed, and you won't have to find out. Where do you do your writing then?
Yeah.
Do you write on the road, or is that what you do when you're at home so that you can kind of avoid mentally being there?
The first phase that I was talking about usually happens on the road.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I gather most of the ideas for everything. And then the second phase usually happens when I get home for an extended amount of time. And that's when I'm also dealing with being home, which I don't like. So the songs get finalized at home.
Got it.
I'm too scatterbrained on tour to finish songs.
That's a tough vibe. I've never been able to write much on the road, and I have a special place of enmity in my heart for people that can. It makes me so angry that they're able to do that.
It's so brutal. I don't understand how anybody especially people that you record on the road. Like you see them in the bus or whatever with their little Apollo, and they're sitting there recording stuff. I'm like, what are you doing? How?
Yeah, I know. I'm like, cool. I'm going to go to the dive bar next door and chug about 3 High Lifes. So have a great time. But, but I'm only in Indianapolis for one night tonight. So, well, talk to me a little bit about the recording of this latest album. You did it up in Dallas at Modern Electric Studio. How was working there, and how was it different than past projects that you've worked on?
First of all, it was a very limited group of us in there, based just COVID precaution kind of stuff.
Got it.
It was only 3 of us in there. For the most part, Bo Bedford was producing it, and so it was Bo, Jeff, and I. Jeff was engineering, and then we would bring in musicians maybe half an hour, and then they'd be gone again. So it was a much more lonely experience than other times, in a very positive way. It was very focused, and since we had built our little environment and our little atmosphere, and nobody was coming in, nobody was coming to break it. So we were able to just build this positive mood and maintain it the whole time, which is something that I've struggled to do in the past. And Bo's also an incredible producer, incredible songwriter, and he didn't really do a lot of the writing. Like I came in with the songs ready, but he definitely understood the writing. And I think him being able to understand the songs from the writing perspective made it easier for us to just blast through the production side of it.
And so, it strikes me if you just saying that someone understands your songs, that isn't always the way that a songwriter feels. And so that must have led to a fair amount of trust that you had in him if he was able to hear what you were going for.
I think so, yeah. And it also helped me believe that if he suggested something, it was probably the right suggestion. When normally that's when, pride kicks in and you go, no, I wrote it this way.
Right.
But just knowing that I could trust him with the songs made it very easy. And to be fair, the last experience that I had with Ross Robinson on the last record, I also trusted him with the songs. It was just a very different trust.
Sure.
And we were going for a different, not emotion, but a different human element on the last record to this one. So.
And what was the element that you were going for in this latest one?
I think I wanted the songs to exist as their own beings, as their own honest selves, as opposed to the last record was me trying to infuse as much of my personal self into the songs. So the songs weren't necessarily their own thing. They were vessels for me to exist in. Mm-hmm. On this record, it was almost like serving the songs to be their own single unit. And I was serving the songs this time.
That makes sense. I feel like, the record before that you were describing, I feel like so many people, myself included, feel that way about a debut album. Where you want, on your debut, you do want those songs to reflect who you are and your ethos in a different way than you ever want to ever again with succeeding albums that are done under the same name.
Yeah, I think I'm sure you felt this as well, but I feel like once you realize maybe I don't want everyone to see this side of me and hold me to it.
Right. Yeah.
It always seems like such a good idea to just present every cell in your body to somebody until it happens, and then it's like, oh, I can keep some for myself.
Totally. Well, and I mean, yeah, you're also showing them every cell in your body that's there right then. But you change over time, or at least you should change over time, and I would start to kind of feel phony trying to write songs. My debut came out almost 15 years ago, and it's like, well, I'm not the same dude. So if I'm trying to write those same songs, it's just I'm older than that, man. I'm not going to try to write like a 21-year-old anymore.
Yeah, which is a great debut, by the way. I am a fan. So
thank you, man. Thank you. Well,
absolutely.
I'm so glad we got a chance to rap, man. And thanks so much for telling our listeners about your story so far. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for letting me ramble. I know there's a lot of it.
Hell no, man. That's what these are for. That's why we called you up, brother.
Well, thank you so much for your time and your kindness. I really appreciate it.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Amigo the Devil's latest album is entitled Born Against, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.